Welcome back to the Roll-Up. Today's video, we have a really interesting interview with Stephane from OneBalance, some of the pioneers of what is known as the C.A.K.E framework, which I've been tweeting about quite a bit recently, as I think that chain abstraction is the solution to this modular fragmentation problem. We talked about credible accounts, resource locks, the idea behind MEV in the chain abstraction landscape, as well as whether or not every single user will be their own roll-up in the future. We also talked about some things like local consensus and other interesting ideas that Stephane has been recently tweeting about. Hope you guys enjoy. Of course, welcome back to the Roll-Up. Quick word from our lovely sponsors, and then we'll jump right in.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fractal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fractal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fractal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fractal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fractal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fractal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Everclear is pioneering the clearing layer. The clearing layer can almost be thought of as splitwise when you go on a trip with friends, but for the blockchain. What I mean by that is when users are sending cross-chain messages, there's oftentimes fillers and solvers who have balances left on different chains that they need to rebalance and reset their positions. This is where Everclear comes in. Everclear is pioneering a collaborative approach to the chain abstraction future, and they are willing to work with interoperability partners, solvers, and other providers in the space to build a interoperable and chain abstraction future. Check out Everclear at everclear.org, and welcome back to the Roll-Up.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Roll-Up. Today, we have an interesting conversation about what I like to consider the intersection of chain abstraction and modularity. It's kind of how I've been thinking about it. This chain abstraction being as this antidote for this modular future of scaling all these different chains. And we've seen quite a few different interactions and also ideas being tossed around. So I think that we're going to try to clear the air today on some of these and discuss what Stephane and the OneBalance team have recently launched with credible accounts, credible stack, and more, as well as some of the work that they've been doing at Frontier Research. So welcome in. And yes, Stephane, welcome to the Roll-Up. It's the first time here.
Hey guys, yeah, super excited to be here. Yeah, we can dive into everything. I know we have a packed schedule, so we'll try to make it as concise and useful as possible.
Sounds great, man. Yeah, welcome to the show. Maybe you could start just by giving our audience a quick introduction to yourself and to OneBalance, and then we'll dive into all the very cool research that you guys are doing.
Yeah, of course. I'm Stephane, so I've been building on Ethereum for a very long time. I started in 2017. I've sort of looked at every single layer of the stack, worked a lot on standards, worked a lot on the community. My previous project was Flashbots, so I was one of the co-founders there, and obviously we shipped MEV and MEV Boost, which sort of says a lot about how MEV is processed on Ethereum. But I've since left that, and I've been running a research organization for a little while that just aims to sort of accelerate some of the technologies and trends that I foresee as being useful for the cryptocurrency space. And our latest project that we just sort of unveiled not too long ago is called OneBalance. And so OneBalance is it's a framework for deploying credible accounts being something we can dive a little bit more into. But the entire goal with it is to drive towards this chain abstracted future. So yeah, super excited to dive into anything that that may be interesting.
Yeah, I think what would be super cool, and what we've been asking is like maybe you could provide us with your definition of chain abstraction. Like, what does that mean to you, and to OneBalance, and like how do you, yeah, like how do you tangibly explain chain abstraction?
Yeah, I think the Everclear folks were sort of one of the first ones to talk about this. But I think chain abstraction is a vision that the space has been driving towards for a very long time. Certainly, I was working on these kinds of technologies back in 2019, which is way before there were any chains. But the goal for it is to really create a user experience of using Web3 that is scalable enough and intuitive enough for having a billion concurrent people using Web3. And so when you ask this question, how do you have a billion people with various different levels of sophistication, technical sophistication, using a system? It starts to make you ask a lot of questions around scalability, usability, all these different things. And so I'd say, chain abstraction is kind of a uniting flag for anyone that cares about this problem to rally together and say, how do we enumerate and solve the various different challenges that it involves.
Awesome. Okay, and there's very many pieces that make up that vision of getting people, a million or a billion concurrent people, all using this single state machine at the same time. And so, I mean, when you're thinking about that, like, what is kind of like the landscape of the current landscape of chain abstraction, and where do you think are some of the missing pieces? And then we can go into like, how you guys are approaching some of this problem space.
It's a super fast moving area, right? I think every week we're seeing new projects start to launch and try to offer solutions for chain abstraction. Our contribution to the space was to try to develop some kind of framework that helped people reason about it. We call this the C.A.K.E framework. I don't know if there's a way to like put an image up on the screen about it, but it says basically a picture. It paints a picture of what the system looks like in order to achieve chain abstraction, which is we need to introduce some counterparties that are affecting state transitions on chain on behalf of end users. And so this is a representation of sort of the OneBalance view of it, using credible accounts. But if really what you care about is in the middle, you're introducing these solvers, that are doing operations on chain on behalf of the users. And so the chain abstraction question in many ways is, how do you build an ecosystem that switches away from the idea that users are directly interacting with the chain towards the idea of users interacting with some counterparties that are affecting things on their behalf. And there's all kinds of different roles that start to get challenged when you build this. And so our goal with the framework was to pose sort of this unifying vision, assign some roles to the various different players that are contributing to this stack, and give them some of the research on what are the hard problems that need to be solved. So in this system here, as we sort of look at it, our contribution with OneBalance is saying a key part of the problem is making it secure for solvers to do things on behalf of users. And the way that we do this is using credible accounts and resource locks. So that's really the OneBalance contribution to the whole chain abstraction space. It's just a concept of resource locks and providing some mechanisms that allow for securing these, which we then call credible accounts.
And this is like done in the sense of understanding that chain abstraction is not like a one team can make the solution work kind of field. It's like you guys have put this stack together and have pinpointed a place where you want to specifically focus on, but with the understanding that it's more of a collaborative approach and that there's different parts of this stack which teams have to work on together to kind of get to this end result.
Exactly. Like, I mean, we have an integrated approach to chain abstraction already. It's called Coinbase and it's called Binance, right? Like you're not interacting with the chains directly when you're interacting with them. But we're trying to build something that's a little bit different than that, right? That's non-custodial, that's modular, that allows for plugins to happen and like can create an ecosystem. And the only way to do that is with open standards. So our entire approach is around these open standards, saying like, you know, we're a small piece of this, and there's a lot of like really important things that have been built already. There's been, there's been, if not like tens of millions, definitely like maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars spent already on this infrastructure. And so it would be very, very short-sighted for us to come in and say like, oh yeah, we're going to rebuild this entire thing from scratch and like we are right and everyone else is wrong. Like, no, that's not the correct approach here. I think the right approach is to say we have an insight over like a very small piece of this that we think we can contribute and we'll drive this forward. And then if our goal is to get the entire industry to realize this vision together. And so it's not just about us, it's about like every other member and stakeholder of the industry succeeding as well.
Awesome. And you mentioned that like a key piece of this tech that allows this to operate securely and let solvers securely interact with the chain on behalf of users is this resource lock. Could you explain like a little bit more about like what the resource lock is and how it enables this secure solver ecosystem?
Yeah, so this gets a little bit into the weeds of how OneBalance works. So I'll try to bring everyone on this journey with me in explaining it. So there's this problem called the equivocation problem, which is pretty fundamental to any chain. And if you look at sort of how proof of stake mechanisms work, they're all about trying to resolve the equivocation problem. So equivocation problem is how do you prevent a user from signing two different messages that are both considered valid by the system. And there's all kinds of mechanisms that you can sort of engage in to achieve this. The main way that people do this today is by saying, oh, the user is going to lock up their assets on chain somewhere, right? And so if you look at any of the sort of message passing bridges or even like a roll-up bridge contract, right? How do you deposit into the roll-up? Well, you deposit your assets on chain into the rollup contract. And that's all just to enable the ability for a user to create a credible commitment over their assets being locked up. They still own these assets, right? Like they have the assets represented on the rollup, but they've credibly locked it up on the source chain. So our observation was to say like a lot of people are building mechanisms that rely on locking up assets on the source chain. But if that source chain is Ethereum, that's really expensive and really slow. So you'd be much better off if you didn't force everyone to go lock up those assets on Ethereum, but instead they could just lock it up inside of their accounts. That means that they can lock up assets exist on any chain by just issuing some lock against it. So that's really the thing that it unlocks. It says you can now do secure cross-chain messaging without relying on a lock on the origin chain. You can simply have a lock on the account, hence credible account.
And this equivocation problem, it sounds like it's normally like cross roll-up transactions. It's like it's not just that you're signing like multiple messages that one chain considers valid. This equivocation problem happens when you sign a message on one rollup, and then at a really similar time, you sign a message on another rollup, and the one rollup doesn't recognize the state of the other rollup, and so you kind of have these messages that are both valid through those rollups, but when you consider both of them at the same time, they're contradictory.
Yeah. So this is the asynchrony problem, right? Because if you're on a single chain, right? Think of it. If you're a solver bringing someone else's transaction on a single chain, in your execution contract, you can check the balance of the sender, right? And then you can revert if the balance is not what it's supposed to be. But when you're in an asynchronous context, you can't make that check. So you don't have that safety guarantee that protects the solver. And so you need to develop some other mechanisms that allow for solver protection.
Got it. Yeah, Andy.
Why are solvers needed to be protected? Is it like a capital thing? Is it like what's the protection for solvers requirement?
It's to prevent double spending. So here's an example. Okay, you have 100 USDC on base, and you want to buy an NFT that's traded on Solana, right? And so you issue this limit order, 100 USDC on base for NFT on Solana for a counterparty to execute. Now that counterparty has to go buy that NFT on Solana on your behalf and then credit it to your account, right? But if in the duration of time that they do this, you then spend your 100 USDC into ETH, then you end up with both the money and the NFT. Whereas the solver now has basically bought you an NFT for free. So that's why you need to lock it up, is so that the solver has a time to go get that NFT, credit it to your account, bring a proof that they've credited to your account, and then claim the initial value that you locked up.
And you meant, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was just going to get into like this idea of credible accounts being different from basically EOAs or like smart accounts or universal accounts. There's kind of like these terminologies here. I guess what is the key property difference here between a credible account, a smart contract account, and like an EOA, and maybe there's something else that we could pull up as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to steal the screen from you if you allow me. So yeah, this should be me. So on here, if we go, yeah, we talk about it here. So as you mentioned, there's sort of the concept of external accounts. There's the concept of smart accounts, right? 4337, people are quite familiar with these. I added stateful accounts, which is the 3074, 7702 stuff that's being talked about more and more. All of these are compatible to become credible accounts. The thing to like note with all of them is they in of themselves have the ability to equivocate. So an external account can sign 2 transactions using the same nonce, right? And from the protocol's perspective, both of those transactions are considered valid. This is why it's able to equivocate. In a smart account, you can also do this. In many ways, oftentimes it says you can upgrade your account, or you can like change the approval on the token that you've like you made an approval for. You can issue an approval to someone else. All of these are ways in which smart accounts are able to equivocate. And then the exact same thing happens with stateful accounts. You can change the delegation of which contract is implementing the logic for this external key. And so all of these accounts need to be wrapped with some kind of wrapper that makes it credible. And you can do it separately with each of them. There's like different approaches to doing so. And all this wrapper says is this user, for a duration of time or some external conditions, cannot do things with the assets that it holds. And so it basically escrows the assets without moving the assets from the account that it's in.
Gotcha. Okay. So all of these credible accounts are very much like parameter based, and the requirement to onboard into a credible account, maybe like on a more like practical level here, are we talking like user has to pull up their EOA and like make a credible account and transfer funds, and like how does a user open a credible account?
Covalent is solving the long-term data availability problem, where a lot of the data availability providers today in the modular space, when you post data to them, they actually only hold that data for about 12 to 16 days. And then it's basically, it can go into an archive node, or oftentimes it's just kind of put away into the abyss. And what Covalent's trying to do is build this long-term data availability solution, which can plug into some of these modular data availability providers and provide this longer-term perpetual data solution. So what we try to think of this as is when you post transaction data onto Celestio or Veil or any of these modular DA solutions, or even Ethereum, Covalent is able to provide a long-term data storage and data availability platform for that data after the time period. Blockchains are billboards, not databases, and we need these providers in the space to be able to kind of hold on to the long-term data that is provided from these providers and these blockchain state. This is where Covalent comes in. They just had a nice rebrand. Check them out on Twitter as well as their website. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Mantle is a layer 2 blockchain with one of the biggest on-chain treasuries in all of crypto, and they had a 100-day campaign called Metamorphosis live now. What this is it is a campaign for their liquid staked ETH token, METH, as well as their upcoming liquid restaking token, C.A.K.E, where you can utilize this token on the Mantle network in a variety of different apps, some of your favorite restaking protocols and DeFi protocols, and earn yields in the form of powder, which will eventually be turning into a governance token. Mantle's been around for a while. We like them because they use their own form of EigenDA. They have a good ecosystem and they're growing. So check out this 100-day Metamorphosis campaign and hope you guys enjoy the rest of this video.
Yeah, so we have, if you go to OneBalance.io, I think users can already start to create these credible accounts. So we've opened pre-registration for these accounts. Now we haven't yet enabled deposits into these accounts. This is kind of just like pre-generating the account and getting ready for the deposits that are going to come later this summer. But practically speaking, it looks very similar to just like onboarding into a new wallet. Unless, MetaMask comes in and they say, we want to integrate natively into credible accounts, then they would be able to like allow for users that are already using MetaMask to turn their MetaMask accounts into credible accounts. But for users that are on MetaMask today and they would like to use this functionality, they would effectively need to start using new wallets that enable these capabilities. I think a lot of the folks that are building smart accounts, it's much easier for them to deliver this than the folks that are building EOA accounts, because it's much closer to the approach that the smart accounts take already. Users of smart accounts are used to their asset residing on a smart contract on chain somewhere, and this would be the same here. Whereas for EOAs, the path to making EOAs credible is a little bit more difficult because it requires users not having access to their seed phrase. Basically, you need to have a shard of your seed phrase that's within some like MPC environment, as opposed to having sort of root access onto the account.
This tends to be something that I just keep coming back to with these universal account, credible account type of wallets. I'm always, it's still kind of a thing to understand for me, where I'm like, okay, we get this enabling of all these amazing features that we're talking about, which make the experience better, but like we have to do so in a non-custodial way, which obviously you understand. But it's like it gets into like the wallet and account schematics at like a very deep like programming level, which I think is kind of tough to kind of wrap your head around on like these private keys, public keys, and yeah, it's different than like, I don't know, scaling a blockchain or talking about the layers of the modular stack or something. It's like a deeper level of
I think that the part that's interesting here is it's scary, right? Like, I think for a lot of users, when you just say like, oh, now I'm using this chain as opposed to that chain, they're like, great, this chain is like more usable. But it like to this date, like not your keys, not your crypto, all of these different like memes that have been propagated in the space are so baked into the user journey of how they are interacting with their accounts, and it's really, really tough to get users to change. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I just recently like changed from MetaMask to Rabby. But if someone sends me something and they say like, yo, check out this app, my default is still to open it in my browser, and then realize, oh wait, my wallet is not here anymore, and then I go to the Rabby thing and then I do it there. But like, as someone that's used the space for so long, I've been so trained into this existing usage pattern that changing those patterns is really where I think the challenge is with any of these technologies.
Okay, so I still have not. Andy's been telling me to get on Rabby for like months now. I don't know if I'm just dragging my toes. To me, it's like daunting to like migrate wallets, whether that's like a private key migration or like have to move all of my assets from all of my.
Dude, they literally have a transfer from your other wallet button. Like it's so easy.
I wanted to just take a quick sidebar and like, can you guys just finally Rabby pill me? Like, why am I just? I feel like I'm still unconvinced, but I want to be convinced.
I don't have any Rabby bags. I think Rabby is a great product though. Like what I like about it is the security of the simulation of all the different transaction. And also, I know that like once I load an app inside of it, I will like reliably be able to access that app in this like closed window. So I don't have all the other shit that happens in my browser, right? Like if you just have a browser plugin, someone could inject malicious other like browser extension that like overwrites your call data and then like does something else with it, right? And then boom, apes are gone. But if you're in the Rabby environment, you're kind of like sandboxed within like just the website and the Rabby environment, and that's just like a strictly superior security model for interacting with stuff. So that was what got me over the line. But I know that's not the same for everyone else.
Yeah, for me, it was like you can go on any application. I just have it in the browser. I use like hardware wallets and things. So these kind of ape stolen problem, they'd have to apes steal my seed phrase or my.
Or they can just feed you bad call data and then your apes are gone.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any apes, so hopefully they're gonna go after somebody else. But I've just got like they do the thing where you can swap the chain on the app. So you go from one app on ZK Sync to Scroll to Arbitrum, and it swaps. And Stephane, I kind of joke around about this. This is like my current experience of chain abstraction is like when a Rabby automatically switches the apps on the chain that it's on. You just got to click the switch thing immediately. Like it picks it up and then it swaps it. So needless to say, I'm excited for that transition. But yeah, I also feel like getting off of Rabby even from now to like going into something like OneBalance is going to be hard for me. I almost feel like what you guys are doing maybe isn't even for like these like OG DeFi summer yield farmer, 10,000 transactions on chain in the last 2 years. It's more like for the people who are going to be kind of new to the space, I think. Both, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Folks like Rabby and MetaMask would benefit a lot from providing credible accounts through their stuff. And just to be clear, our goal isn't to like displace these guys, right? Like my goal is to deliver more capabilities to end users, and going through existing distribution channels to those users is like much quicker path there than trying to convince a bunch of people to like use a different thing than MetaMask. And so the dream there is for MetaMask and Rabby to integrate credible accounts and like provide these capabilities for their end users to do all of this secure cross-chain things without having to have a multi-step process, right? Like, yeah, you can switch to your, Rabby can automatically switch your chain depending on the app that you're on, but you're still stuck having different balances on different chains, right? Whereas I'm saying, with OneBalance, you can do the automatic switching and you can use all of your assets regardless of which chain it's on. And so that's just like a much needed feature for I think anyone that's using these wallets. To your point around new users, like I do think that this unlocks sort of latent demand, right? So there's a bunch of folks that would be using Web3 that are not because they're scared, right? Just like we are scared of changing the approach that we do to wallets. There's a lot of folks that are scared to set up a wallet at all. And that's kind of like the latent demand that we really want to unlock and bring to the market.
How do you approach this idea of like obfuscating for convenience versus like, or I guess like abstracting for convenience versus obfuscating away potential risks and security? Like, if someone has wrapped ETH and then they have ETH on Scroll, they have ETH on ZK Sync, ETH on Optimism, ETH on Arbitrum. If we're going to aggregate all of that into one single ETH balance, are those really all ETH? Can we call them all ETH? I think to some users, they would, it's all ETH, but to then more advanced users, they're like, no, like it's an L2 version of ETH and it's wrapped and it has bridge risk. How do you kind of consider like these different security measures and what to expose to users versus what to keep behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think that's the wallet. That's probably the biggest challenge that the wallet faces. It's not necessarily how do you deliver the capabilities for doing cross-chain stuff. It's how do you manage the trust that the users have given you in a way that aligns with like what they're trying to achieve. And so, yes, there's going to be wallets that are more, advanced, right, and allow for their users to manage their balances across all the chains in like a very granular way. But I think the majority of the users don't really care about this risk. and they're happy to delegate to the wallet to say, I trust you to make sure that my ETH doesn't end up on a chain that's going to get rugged, right? And then so then it's up to the wallet to decide, like, what chains do I want to expose to my users? You know, what chains do I like allow their ETH to be spread over versus not? And if a chain gets like halted or rugged or whatever, right? Like you have like a roll up that gets rugged, then it's going to be up to the wallet. Like the wallet is the one that the user is going to come and complain at and say like, where's my ETH, right? And so they have to start to think about like, how do we recover from those kinds of scenarios? So it's a tough challenge. It's definitely a tough challenge. I don't know what the solution is there. Like, you know, maybe these wallets will start to like take out insurance or something against like chain halting, but it's something that they need to solve. In the same way that if you're using Binance, right, you need to think about like what happens if Solana halts, what happens if whatever else happens. It's up to Binance to figure it out.
So you don't consider OneBalance a wallet?
No. So OneBalance is a provider of credible accounts. So the only job that we do is we issue, secure, and resolve resource locks. That's all that we do. We want this to be integrated into all the wallets, and we allow users to create accounts directly with us, and we're going to deliver them capabilities. But really, like our key job is just dealing with the resource locks.
Got it. Just shifting gears a little bit and revisiting like one of the earlier points about asynchronous communication. This was just kind of like buzzing in my mind because we have another take on this chain abstraction world that is trying to achieve synchronous composability, like these shared sequencers. Mm-hmm. How would that, if let's say shared sequencers got some pretty wide adoption, how would that change the approach that you have to chain abstraction with this more like locking, solving, and then unlocking asynchronous communication?
Yeah, I'll share my screen again. So it's tackling the same problem from two different sides. It's probably like the easiest way to think about it. So this is our post where we introduced OneBalance on ETH Research. So in the FAQ at the bottom, I say like, are you providing pre-confirmations? Pre-confirmations is kind of like a similar way that the universal synchronous composability, right? It's like, how do you get validators to orchestrate with other validators to make commitments over something that they're going to include into a future block? This is like the thing that you need to look at is resource locks are users making commitments to solvers. Pre-confirmations are proposers making commitments to solvers, okay? And both of them are just to help solvers manage their risk, right? So on the proposer side, it's to say like, oh, because you're having this synchrony between these two rollups, you can have the protection that you need. But they still benefit from getting the resource locks, right? The resource locks don't really care how the solver gets the atomicity across the two different chains, right? But the solver can manage their risk by doing this. The way that I think about it is like, this is how we go from, this is like an answer to the question, are solvers market makers or are they like individuals? The more commitments and risk management tools that you can provide to the solvers, the less it needs to eat the risk themselves through other means. And so this makes the smaller like this makes a solver like a less big centralized entity, but it approaches it from two different sides.
Like much lower barrier to entry.
Exactly.
Very cool. I've got kind of a, and if you have anything, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was just curious about
actually. So we're co-hosting an event with Espresso and some other folks at ETHCC that's going to be looking at this. So we have two parallel tracks, one that looks at the pre-confirmation, base sequencing, USC, all these things, and then the other track that looks at resource locks, credible stack, and everything else. So that's going to be an event that's going to happen at ETHCC.
Awesome.
Cool. We'll probably be there. We'll be running around the streets of Brussels looking for pretzels and waffles. So hopefully we can meet up. On the note of the solver being kind of in the middle between these proposers passing on precoms and then OneBalance passing resource locks from the from the entity on the left.
Users.
Of course, can't forget the users. Is this solver network something that you guys are actively like pursuing to grow? I've seen FUD on different intent-based networks of them only having one solver network or one set of solvers, or kind of like how do you go about like decentralizing this, or even if not decentralizing, how do you go about making sure this is the most efficient network of solvers possible? Is it a collaborative effort with some teams, or is it something that you guys are working on as well? How does that look?
Yeah, so we're not building a solver network ourselves. We just issue and secure resource locks. But solver networks is a critical part of the credible stack. So again, I'll keep sharing my screen, but I think it's helpful for the listeners. So this is the credible stack, right? So the credible commitment machine is kind of like where we sit. This is like the issuance of resource locks. These are consumed by solvers, and the solvers provide the fulfillment for them, right? And then the chain is providing commitments also to the solvers. So, but there's a bunch of folks that are building this component and have like the existing distribution and whatnot. And so what we are doing is we launched this thing called the Fellowship of the OneBalance, which is anyone that's building components on these, we're asking them to come with us and help standardize the interfaces that are being used around all of these things. So we have a list here of the solver networks that are on board with this approach. One thing that's really challenging about this level of the stack is solving what we call the order flow trilemma. So we presented this when we initially released the C.A.K.E framework, right? But basically, if you're implementing an OFA or a solver network, whether it's like Uniswap X or Cross, like 1inch Fusion, you have to deal with this problem, which is you can't really be permissionless and have optimal speed and optimal price altogether. When you're designing it, you got to sort of pick two of the three. And so we're seeing, to your comment of like, oh, this solver network only has one solver. That's because they compromise on the permissionless piece. Right? They say, oh, I'm going to run a whitelist. And then that's going to be like an easier way for me to solve this trilemma, because now I can trust myself not to provide shit execution. Right. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of this. There's a lot of innovation still that needs to be had to be able to introduce permissionlessness into these systems.
In theory, a permissionless market where anyone can come in and solve transactions would theoretically provide quicker and more affordable execution, right? Because then you open up the network of potential solvers to like a wider market. Why doesn't that hold for this case?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about like what's the cause of the order flow trilemma.
Sure.
So when you're running an auction, right, whether it's like an RFQ or something else, you need to select a winner, right? And the problem is like, what if that winner doesn't execute on what you asked them to execute, right? Then you have a reliability problem. And so if you have an auction that just purely optimizes for price, you'll end up with shit reliability. The way that people fix this is they say, okay, now we have a whitelist of solvers. And if you have an execution quality that's below some threshold, we're not going to route orders to you anymore. And so they're enforcing good reliability by just gatekeeping on who gets access to the flow. So that's why you end up in these design patterns.
Kind of a slight off tangent here. How do these solvers networks end up accruing like value outside of just being like a service provider? Like how do they? It's almost like they're like they're like a service business that provides their services to these different teams which use them. But how do they themselves accrue like some sort of staying power in the market, or any sort of like value worthy of like investment or worthy of like token or kind of any of this idea? If there's always just going to be a better one coming in, or more teams, or somebody who has more money, like are they kind of replaceable, or how are you thinking about these like accruing actual value?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple questions in there. So one of them is like, what's the value that's being created by this role in the system? And then a separate question is like, how does a solver network versus an individual solver compete with each other in providing this role? And like, is there room for the solver network to be able to capture value? I don't really have an opinion on the latter. Like, is it like, a better business to run a single solver or to run a solver network. But I can talk a little bit as to like what is the value that the solver network role plays. At the end of the day, they're doing a fairly complex job, right? Which is they are taking in limit orders of some sort, and then they're routing, they're like indexing the entire set of state, and they're doing routing across not just multiple pools, but across multiple different chains, right? And so that service of like calculating the routes is something that is like valuable and is going to be compensated as part of the user's execution. Like this all gets like factored into like the gas costs that the user pays. If the user has a bunch of their state on a network that's like really shady and like difficult to get assets off of it, the solver is going to quote a higher fee to be able to internalize that risk themselves, right? And the user is going to be willing to pay that fee because whatever, they care about doing that thing on that network. So there's an opportunity for the solver networks to collect a fee on the service that they provide. Now, you know, how is that like played out in the end state of the system? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I worry that it's potentially like a rich get richer or like a winner take all type of ecosystem, because in my mind, the solver with the most money that has the best coverage of these chains is going to be able to solve across. It's going to be able to solve with the best execution across all these chains. That's probably a little bit too simplistic, but do you kind of think like similarly? If you were to have an opinion on like the solver that would win, theoretically would be the one with the most money on the most chains.
Yeah, that's a capital efficiency question, right? So if you look back at like the original cross-chain MEV paper by Alex Obadia, it sort of comments on this. It says like in a cross-chain setting, like having the inventory on multiple different chains gives you an advantage. Now there's a question, which is like, is that actually the case, or is there actually, you know, retail has a lower cost of capital than any sophisticated market maker would have? Maybe you can create a system that uses AMMs on the target chains to be able to lend out to the solvers, such that the solvers don't actually need to be holding the tokens, but can just access them on demand. And then maybe you have a construct that doesn't actually require the solvers to have capital everywhere. Now, at least then they can hold sort of like a stable coin on all of the different chains. There's like capacity constraints. So like maybe you have solvers that are like specialized on certain chains and not others because they want to concentrate their capital on those chains. And so any order that goes to Blast is like better served by, I don't know, Enso, because that's sort of where their specialty is, right? Whereas anyone that goes to Base, you know, Propeller Heads is like, no, that's our chain. We're going to be the best ones there. So I think that there's room in this market for niche to sort of emerge. The thing that I'm trying to contribute to this is just to say you don't need to like factor in such complicated risk modeling on the execution side, because you have resource locks that allow you to have confidence over the request. At least that, you know, at least that helps to reduce the complexity of running that job.
Cartesi is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesi enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesi.io, that's cartesi.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today. Nice. Yeah, I guess just like kind of as we wrap up here, one question to sort of bring this full circle. I'm curious how your experience at Flashbots and this cross-domain MEV question has influenced your work on OneBalance. Because as we talk about the solver landscape, it sounds a lot like the block builder landscape in the way that they're sort of like solving the ordering of transactions on behalf of a blockchain. So I'm just curious, like, what are some of the parallels that you've realized, you know, from working on both Flashbots and now OneBalance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a missing piece that a lot of people that are working on chain abstraction didn't have, which was the MEV piece. They didn't realize that everything about chain abstraction is about MEV at the end of the day. And so a lot of the designs that we saw earlier on were just not incentive compatible with the idea of a permissionless sort of execution setting. And so to your question, like how much did it impact it? It impacts everything. Every single mechanism design that can be proposed in this space has to have this cross-chain MEV thing factored in. Otherwise, it just won't work. And it will work if you then make it like permissioned and like custodial or whatever, right? But like those aren't the systems that we're looking to design here. And so yeah, it's fundamental. I'd have to spend some time thinking about like the specific things, but like even just the order flow trilemma, right? Like that's an MEV concept. It's not like a computer science concept, right? And so it's just all these small useful mental models that help design better systems.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why I have to broadcast my $7 Starbucks transaction to the entire global mempool when we could just be on local consensus and have a much better system. But I think that's a conversation for a different day as well.
Yeah. That is a long rabbit hole to go into.
We've built these systems where the entire global population needs to have their eye on every transaction, which just doesn't make much sense.
Exactly. Yeah. But the account-centric worldview no longer requires that, which is sort of also my contribution there. Is like part of the observation of the MEV problem is it comes a lot from this thing that you actually stated. If we don't have the entire world looking at what everyone else is doing, you actually have a lot less of an MEV issue. And the way to get there is to have like individuals be able to use their own accounts to make commitments to other individuals, as opposed to rely on the global view of the world to make commitments. So it all wraps together.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to figure out what like some more local consensus designs would look like at the blockchain level and at the validator level, and kind of putting that together.
Yeah, my hope is that every single validator is its own rollup, every single account is its own rollup, and then everything is cross-chain messaging between rollups.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work, man.
That sounds like a lot of rollups.
It's a lot of rollups. Get ready.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure hosting you on the rollup today, Stephane. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, the rollup is a rollup as well. When are we going to launch our own chain, man?
Amazing. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Cheers.